I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. A new government report finds that healthcare providers in the United States are increasing their adoption of health information technology, but their willingness to do so is tied to the incentives available. What's more, the government is implementing a new plan to improve interoperability, a suggestion that results from past efforts have fallen short of expectations. We spoke to Joe Smith, Chief Medical Officer and Chief Science Officer for West Health, about the current state of health information technology, the barriers to interoperability, and what it will take to deliver on the promise of technology to improve healthcare. Joe, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
The Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology this month issued its annual update to Congress on the adoption of health information technology. The report is mandated by the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health, or the HITECH Act. I want to get your thoughts on the report and how healthcare systems are doing in terms of adoption of health information technology. I thought it would, for the benefit of listeners, be good, though, if we started with what the billions of dollars that are being invested in health information technology is supposed to be doing. How is it going to transform healthcare? And in an ideal world, where is it going to be taking us from what and to what?
I think the vision of how health information technology can transform healthcare delivery is something that most people can quickly identify with, understand, and sign up for. I think that the notion that information, viewed as the lifeblood of healthcare and healthcare delivery, ought to flow from the first time it's written down to every other time that it's needed, and that we ought to smoothly integrate up our understanding over time so that a person sick in Poughkeepsie today can benefit from an understanding of how a similarly ill patient was treated last week in Philadelphia. I think we want to have, a smart and learning healthcare delivery system, and that information technology offers the promise of moving information, at the speed of light or at the speed of electronics, to make sure that everyone in the ecosystem is maximally informed, and that we can do so without continuously asking patients the same questions in different settings, or asking them to remember things from one setting to another, or trying to reach the engaged provider at for a prior episode now when their patient presents in a different place with a different issue. And so I think the vision of a smart, informed, ever-learning healthcare system is really what we've all signed up for.
Well, the numbers in the report suggest there's growing adoption of electronic health records, but that's not without some concern. Healthcare providers that are not eligible for incentive payments have been far less aggressive about adopting these systems. How much of a concern should that be?
Well, I do think that's telling. I mean, the opportunity for these systems to have great value, I think, is inherent in the technological capability. But the particular instantiations, the particular solutions are such that for many, you needed an incentive to be in place before people would buy it. And so that's not typically what happens with, market innovation. For Apple to be a success, no one had to incentivize people to buy iPhones. They fit a natural need, and people understood it. And they used user-inspired design to create solutions to problems people experienced, and that these were effective solutions. I think when you see a system where adoption is preferential, where there's an incentive, and it falters or it lags in areas where there isn't an incentive for its adoption, I think it's telling that we haven't yet solved the problem as experienced by the users.
A word that's near and dear to your heart, and one that's a big issue in arriving to this promised land of health information technology, is interoperability, the ability for different electronic health record systems to share data and for the devices and machinery within the healthcare system to capture and share data. The report is less encouraging on that front. What is the state of interoperability?
Well, I think I think when you dive deeply behind that 8-syllable word, you appreciate that it may mean different things to different people, and I think that is in part some of the problem. I think if defined narrowly as you can in fact send some information in one system to another, even if you have to use the equivalent of a fax, an electronic fax, to do so. I think if that's your rather minimalistic definition, I think we've certainly enabled that. But I don't think that's what we need or what the cognoscenti have imagined for interoperability. It's the seamless flow of information, or as the engineers would describe it, as semantic interoperability, to make a complex term even more difficult to understand. But it is the notion that information acquired in one place will be as useful in other places as it is there, and that people will understand its meaning and its relevance and its context, and that it will be available for query and will be available for use and can be acted upon and then can be shared to all of the other agents in the process of healthcare delivery. And that, I think, both from the vantage point of health information technology, but also, and from our perspective, perhaps even more importantly, for the medical devices that are engaged in people's health, wellness, and sickness recovery, I think we don't yet have meaningful, semantic, seamless interoperability in the overwhelming majority of settings. And as a result, we ask providers, busy clinicians, to fill the gap and move information from one device to another, oftentimes transcribing it on their scrubs as they move around. And I think that's an inefficient and error-prone system for which we all struggle, with which we all struggle.
I mean, let's go a little deeper there. Maybe you can do this through an example, but explain why that matters and how it changes the way healthcare operates or improves quality or reduces cost.
Well, sure. So a busy clinician can write an order for a medicine for a patient, and then that information then gets to the pharmacy, and then a nurse has to typically hang that medicine in an IV pump. And at each point there's an opportunity for error. And so I was just visiting a Harvard teaching hospital where they were quick to point out that the notion that you can hang two medicines side by side on two infusion pumps on the same pole, and yet because the pump doesn't recognize the medicine, because the orders didn't flow seamlessly from the order entry system to the administering infusion pump, the nurse has to recognize the medicine, make sure that he or she programs the pump accordingly, and that the opportunity for error there is so great that they lose patients. They lose patients because of the simple error of transcribing the infusion rate or programming the device incorrectly, when all of that can be readily managed if, in fact, the EMRs and the pumps work in an interoperable system, and the pumps can readily recognize the medicines as they're hung. And those are just some of the examples. There are a great many where information transcribed from one device carried to another affords an opportunity for error and harm.
I know we've spoken before about this, and there's, I think, a good one about a device that's supplying fluid to a patient at the same time that another device might be warning that the patient has too much fluid.
Right, or a common setting in controlling blood pressure with medicines. You would like to imagine that the infusion rate is in some sense tailored to the effect you're trying to achieve. So if it's trying to raise your blood pressure, if your blood pressure gets high enough, the infusion would then be backed off, or kind of like the way insulin works. If your glucose begins to trail below normal, the insulin would automatically shut itself off. But we've not yet built those completely interoperable closed-loop control systems because we're not letting data from one device be shared and acted upon another. We're just at the very beginnings of doing that in diabetes, but we haven't begun to do it in hospital settings where you're treating hypertension or you're treating pain. And as a result, patients are left to have their safety in the hands of busy clinicians who watch for one and then titrate the other, instead of closing the loop with technology, which for kind of repetitive and mundane tasks is often preferable.
There are several barriers to interoperability. These range from issues of standards to the self-interest of participants who may not want to make it easy to share data with competitors. What do you see as the primary obstacles?
And so earlier this year, we held a meeting in our nation's capital on interoperability and asked the audience just this question: what did they think were the limitations that kept us from moving forward? And the most common response was the proprietary business models of vendor participants who have an interest in assuring that their product line lands and expands in hospitals, and that one continues to use one specific proprietary system. And so I don't think that's in any way evil or inappropriate in from the perspective of an individual vendor. I mean, they have greater control over the quality of their individual systems, and so they can better manage how data flows in their systems. But the net result of that is a system which has kind of a fragmented information flow, an opportunity for more error than we would like, and it burdens busy clinicians with the notion of being the conductor to finish the symphony, if you will, of the separately excellent and safe and effective devices, which, when put in aggregate and without the ability to speak a common language, result in a much more complex and then relatively then less safe environment.
Are there other primary obstacles you see?
So some point to the notion that the open standards by which interoperability can and should take place are in some measure incomplete, and so I'm not here to say that every I has been dotted and every T has been crossed, but I would say that the FDA has done its bit in recognizing some 27 or 28 different open standards for information flow, and organizations such as HL7 have been around long enough to make sure that when we want to solve a problem, we certainly can. And so I do not think the issues are dominantly technological. I think the issues have been really business models and inertia. And I think at the moment, all hospitals are challenged. I mean, for the most part, they're relatively low-margin businesses and don't have enormous reserves to invest in new systems that would then seek to solve this. So I think we have to make sure going forward that as we do this, we solve it with open standards so that we can smoothly migrate from where we are to where we need to be. So
how do you overcome those obstacles?
And so I think what we need to do is humanize the issue a little bit. I think interoperability as a kind of challenging 8-syllable word doesn't necessarily rise to the top of the list of the CEOs in every large hospital system. But I do think a patient safety imperative is on the top of their list, and doing the best job they can with the resources they have. And so we've tried to make an issue of the excess costs associated with having non-interoperable systems, and the manpower costs in terms of moving the data with people instead of moving it with wires or wireless technology. But I think we also need to make it clear that there's a true safety imperative here, that people are in harm's way by virtue of kind of the complex amalgam of systems that get created when there isn't an opportunity for them all to share information. And so as we make that story more and more clear, and as there are more and more examples of real safety hazard as a result of the absence of interoperability, I think it does rise to the level of action in hospital systems. And so I am pretty positive about progress going forward.
Well, the report that we started this conversation about talks about a new 10-year nationwide roadmap to interoperability. What went wrong with the old roadmap? Did the government underestimate the challenge at hand?
So, I would say that Karen DeSalvo, in her role as ONC, has really put a sense of urgency into this notion of interoperability. And I think that if you ask the good Dr. DeSalvo, even she would say that 10 years seems extremely long. I mean, this is an issue where we're watching a system that is less than it ought to be every day. But it's an issue of how quickly can one move. I mean, so if you look at the budgeting system and the incentives that were available in the earlier stages of meaningful use, I think we've realized we've spent most, or if not all, of that money. And so how can government encourage a transition to a fully interoperable health information technology infrastructure and provide no incentives? I think that politically that's not as attractive or even as viable as it ought to be. And so I think there you're looking at an organization functioning within its limits. The notion of, did government underestimate the challenge? I think one has to give some credit to government for encouraging the adoption of a technological platform that does require change in every hospital. And so I think that is hard work, but it is the beginning. And now, I think the best light you could cast on it is to say, now we're experiencing a problem that's derived from prior successes, that we did get ample enough adoption that we now can experience the problem of a lack of interoperability. It's always easy in hindsight to say, gee, we should have, the government should have thought about this pressing need for interoperability much sooner. I think it was discussed, but for a lot of these systems, they needed to walk before they could run. And so, we're working with a complex environment. And so, I think it can be done better. I think it has to be done better. And I think there's effort to make sure it is being done better.
Well, what does the new roadmap call for? And does this represent a solution or at least a step in the right direction?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I think calling it out as something we have to get done and putting some date certain over on which we're really going to expect and that will be the basis for certification, is that systems have to in fact share. But I think for my taste it still doesn't have all the sense of urgency required. When you realize that patients are in harm's way and that clinicians are being asked to do things which technology really should be doing, then I think you realize that we need to solve this problem perhaps faster than the politics or the pragmatic among us would tolerate. I think the issue is more important than that, and I think it deserves a more expedited timeline. But large government, I think smart people have often said, be careful what you ask for in government, and that anyone big enough to give you everything that you need is also big enough to take away everything that you have. And so I think we do have to be careful as we talk about new government imperatives.
So if on one hand you could say, why isn't there some kind of a government mandate? But on the other hand, what about the healthcare providers themselves? Don't they have enough power among themselves as purchasers of this technology to insist that the suppliers get together and agree on standards and address the problem?
Thanks for that. That is just the kind of the nuanced insight that we took as we put together a thing called the Center for Medical Interoperability, and asking this organization to be run by hospital systems CEOs to look to the vendor community and say, hey, look, we're not going to buy any more of this stuff unless it's seamlessly interoperable, unless it works in a way that allows us to add incrementally to our hospital systems and expect open standard interoperability to continue. We're not going to participate in the prior schema where we would have enormous switching costs if we move from one vendor to another. Instead, we're going to demand functional semantic interoperability from all of those who would sell things to us. And so I do think you can use market power. Up until this point, I think that power has not been sufficiently consolidated to create an obvious need in the vendor community to solve this issue. And so they've been solving it a different way. But I think now with the vendor community being given a message from the buyer that, you need to solve this problem too, not just that it has to work, but it has to play well with others. I think we'll look forward to a different set of solutions.
Well, I mean, do you get the sense that the industry has the discipline and the will to do that?
I think there's, when you say the industry, if you're talking about the healthcare delivery systems,
payers.
Yeah, I think, historically this has been, a cottage industry and a series, a broad array of different forms of cottage industries. But I think you're watching, integration in communities. You're watching consolidation in many communities. You're looking at large hospital systems at this point, and also they're experiencing the financial pressures that come from, an enterprise that consumes nearly 18% of our GDP and provides a product which, I think the Commonwealth Fund just recognized that it's ranked number 11 out of 11 in terms of quality outcomes. And so they're experiencing this great pressure to do more. And I think you get, a bit of a bunker mentality that, we're all in this war together now. How are we going to get out of it? Now, not how am I going to best compare to you, but instead, how are we going to solve it? So I do think that, this pressure will help to drive a form of consolidated interest that will help solve this problem with interoperability.
At the same time as CMS rules change and accountable care organizations become more the norm and hospitals take responsibility for, at least cost responsibility for things that go wrong, is there more pressure on them to see that interoperability is there and as a way to prevent errors, as a way to cut cost?
Absolutely. I was just at a summit of healthcare system leaders in Chicago, and this notion of higher quality care, lower adverse event care results in more favorable economics for providers, I think is a good and healthy alignment. I do see that we're looking at a bit of a change in their overall interest in doing this. Particularly, another example is where you're looking at vertical integration in some markets where hospitals are in the same financial structure with post-acute care settings, and so that as integrated healthcare delivery networks complete the span from doing patient risk assessment in a population-based scenario to acute care settings to post-acute care settings, it's important to have information flow from the beginning prior to hospitalization all the way through to your recovery in a post-acute care setting. You want one information system that manages across those. And so there is this notion of I'm no longer an island, I'm actually an archipelago of islands, and I have to share that information across all of them.
So you're down in San Diego, you've got beautiful weather, an ocean view, a natural sunny disposition, as it were. What's the case for optimism for people who may live in a different kind of setting?
So I'll share with you that in the last 10 days, I've been in San Francisco and Oakland and Chicago and Boston and Baltimore and Nashville. And the weather is different in all of those places, but the challenge is the same. I think we're all fighting this issue of unsustainable healthcare costs, an unsustainable logistical challenge of trying to deal with more and more aging seniors with a healthcare system that is not adding doctors as fast as it's adding patients. And so we all need to solve this issue of a smart and learning healthcare system that works to be giving people what they need when they need it. And the only way we're going to do this is to have information flow seamlessly from where it's acquired to where it's best used. And people get that we have the technology to do this. We experience it in our daily lives with Amazon and Google, and it's really time to experience it in healthcare.
Joe Smith, Chief Medical Officer and Chief Science Officer for West Health. Joe, thanks as always.
Thanks a bunch, Danny. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.